Hi, I'm Josiah Rizzo.
And I'm Benji Jones.
And on Wednesdays, we usually like to wear pink, but in honor of today, which is September 11th, we decided to have a very special, different kind of episode. We're going to pull it back a bit and just kind of talk with you guys. We didn't want to have a bunch of bells and whistles or really obnoxious music.
Yeah, so
leading us in.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk.
Gonna keep this one very simple. Hi, Benji. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Did you remember that? Did you know that today is the 18th anniversary?
I was going to say it's almost 20 years, actually.
Almost 20 years. That's insane.
Crazy.
God.
Not that old.
Do you?
I'm only 21.
I had started thinking about this. There was a that show with Zendaya, Euphoria. And the way it starts off, like apparently each episode starts off with kind of like a montage of where these kids came from and how they got here. And with the Euphoria, like I wouldn't know because I only watched the pilot episode, but the pilot episode starts off with Zendaya's character kind of narrating that she was in the womb and she was comfortable, and then she was ripped out into the cruel world and hated it ever since. And she said she was born, her character says she was born like either a few days before or after 9/11, and she woke up in the world into chaos, like, and the TV was constantly on.
Yeah,
it was blaring, and and I had never thought about it from that perspective because, like, I mean, I remember a line being drawn in the sand. There was pre 9/11 and there was post 9/11, but for some people that's all they've ever known. And the idea that this character who was kind of suffering from crippling anxiety as well, a wealth of other issues, obviously it's a TV show, but there was that interesting idea of like that there are some people who are born into this world of just uneasiness and unrest and like constant war and chaos and what would that leave? What would that leave? Like, of course, if you watch the rest of that show, all of those kids are pretty screwed up.
Yeah. My little brother was born in 2000, so he was born like right before 9/11. So yeah, that is just, there are people born.
That's all they know
around events. Yeah,
that's
like,
crazy.
Same
to
like
think.
with like cell phones. There are people that weren't around before cell phones, and it's like,
I don't know. I can't. It was. I remember when I was taking care of kids in my old church's youth daycare, and I'd have these kids talk to me about their. They'd be like, "Oh, we learned in history today about
9/11."
9/11. I was like, "You learned about it?
Oh, that's history. Yeah,
that is history.
Yeah,
that was what we experienced.
Yeah.
We were there. I mean, we weren't
but that's
there.
how like your grandparents feel when they're like, tell us about Nam, and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so little. Like, but that's like that's history. That's how time works. Like people are born in different times, and you have to like gather knowledge from things that you weren't there for. Like it's literally like for us, like we weren't there for Vietnam. For them, they weren't there for World War I.
But what do you remember about that day?
That day. So I specifically remember this. I was coming downstairs for school, had my backpack on, and the TV in the kitchen was on. And I remember seeing the obviously like news coverage of the first plane had already hit. I'm pretty sure it was just the first one. And I distinctly remember asking my mom, and she remembers this too because we were talking about it a while ago. And she's like, do you remember what you asked me? And I was like, oh, I'll never forget it. And I asked her why the building didn't fall over. And she was like, oh, because it's like they make it like really strong so like they don't like just fall over. And I was like, I just remember thinking that made no sense. It was like that building has to fall over. And it did.
Wow.
But yeah.
Wow.
And then I went to school and they were talking about it. Everybody was like talking about it in school, and like the teachers were like playing like the news coverage and everything in like a lot of our classes. And I think, I don't remember this, but like a lot of people said that we were like, everybody got out of school early that day. So I probably did too.
I remember. First off, I also just want to say thank you guys for listening. And if this might be a little too much for you, even though we're not getting into any graphic details, but obviously feel free to listen to this however you feel comfortable. I remember for me personally, I had just moved from, like, we had literally just moved from California to Texas, no more than a week. I think, yeah. We had been there for maybe 5-6 days.
Wow.
And the house we were staying at, now I didn't grow up in a house that was filled with televisions. We had like maybe one TV, no cable.
Sad day.
They had like a TV in every single room.
Yeah.
And I remember waking up. Now, I've mentioned this plenty of times before. I'm homeschooled. So I woke up later than usual than most people. By the time I woke up, I think I had missed everything. And I don't know that it really hit me. I don't know that I understood what was going on.
Yeah, same. I remember thinking it was like weird. I was like, oh, that's crazy. But it didn't obviously faze you because you're like a kid.
Yeah.
And then I was at school and that was all anybody was talking about. And I was like, what is the deal?
What's going on?
Yeah.
It was weird because to wake up to see every single TV on the same channel, essentially talking about the same thing. And there was this sense that like, oh, something's happening. I knew something was happening. I knew it was big. And I remember my brain like was just like, oh, I wonder if this will make an interesting story in the future. And like I was like suddenly coming up with like hundreds of stories of like people who would escape and
Something
get
like
out of the plane and the building in time. I had no clue, just like the weight of all of that. It's so strange to think about now, but
yeah, to be like that oblivious about like what's going on around you.
Do you remember when it kind of like hit you? Because I kind of remember when it.
Not particularly. Just basically watching all of the coverage in the aftermath of it. I was just kind of like, oh, that's the problem. Because I was just like plane hit building, and I wasn't thinking about people. So it was just kind of like not a thing. And then when you started to see like, oh, like it affected this many people, and like all of this happened, and you see like the tragedy of it, you're like, oh my goodness. And then like when you get older, you realize like the politics of it and all that kind of stuff, and just how big it was.
It really, I feel like it severed essentially, like if you know, if you were to have people look back at history almost like in a Doctor Whovian sense of like, this is the timeline of the world and these are major events, I feel like you could easily pinpoint that and be like, that was a major sever. Like for like, there could have been all of these multiple like normal timelines where things progressed at a normal rate and the world kind of carried on and evolved as usual. But that was like a God, I can't remember what it's called, but like I know there's a term for it in like an accelerated evolution almost. Like there's a term for it in evolution when it's like something, a series of events accelerates and kind of like causes something happens to cause like the evolutionary process
to speed up
at a rate that's it's abnormal compared to how things have been progressing up until then. And that, I feel like that's what 9/11 was. It just essentially hit and there was no going back. If there had been any promise of a future that didn't involve the
airport security being crazy.
It's just more thinking like I feel like you could look back on it whenever we're all outside of this body and realm and just be like, oh wow, there were all these possibilities of where the world could have gone, and then that took us completely in a different direction. But I remember it hit for me when the anthrax scare happened. Whenever it was like, oh, now it can come straight to my doorstep.
Yeah,
and you can
and
open
it makes
up,
it personal.
You can open up a letter and suddenly you're dead.
Which, God.
So I remember when we first struck in Afghanistan, I remember watching it on TV, and there was this weird, like, just knee-jerk reaction that happened in the back of my head that was like, oh, is this it? Is this where war begins?
Yeah.
And it was this weird feeling because, like, you'd always heard about war.
Yeah, but then to be, like, there when one was starting is very...
It's like, I don't remember the Gulf War. I don't remember. I was, like, too young for that.
Yeah.
I didn't really give a shit about it.
And then it's like you also... I don't know. You just don't have a good grasp on war. Like, and then you only have heard of like the only wars you know are like the big ones, and so we're like expecting like World War III, which I mean it could have started honestly.
That's what it felt like.
So yeah,
and that's what I remember feeling because it's like up until then we had gone through Vietnam. Where we had a Cold War. We had fought in Vietnam. We'd have the Gulf War. But there was nothing that kind of brought it to America's shores.
Yeah, because we're always usually fighting other people's wars.
And it's like, and it just felt very like we grew up in a time period where it was kind of like hey, it's easy breezy. Like,
yeah, right.
Everything on TV was bright, colorful. A lot of the things that were on TV that were like, it's funny when you think about what was on television during the 90s that was kind of edgier and grungier was more from a racial perspective, where it was like, hey guys, we still have issues here that we're not dealing with, but every other major like television show was kind of like, no, we don't.
We're fine.
We're fine. So you had this like, you had this sense of ease and comfort that America was going through. It was just like, we're fine. We really are fine. And then that all literally disappeared in the span of like 2 hours.
Yeah. Oof.
2 hours, we went from like feeling completely on top to just the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And compared to other people's attacks, compared to like how many people died on our land, and not to do any disservice to our men and women who lost their lives that day, it's insane to think that was so tragic for us. And there's people who are dealing with stuff like that, like,
oh yeah,
all the time,
constantly, like different like countries where people just are dying every day.
And for us, it just was something we weren't prepared for, and it really it affected us. And for a brief period, people kind of rallied with us. I mean, there were even Muslims who were just like, they were not for Al Qaeda, they were not for, they did not stand with the attacks that were sent our way, and they were like, no, we stand with our American brothers. And it's just insane to think that for a brief moment, the world was unified.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, everyone was in our corner just going like, no, we're here for you.
Cool. Yeah.
And I remember, oh my God, I remember the American flags. That is something I can never forget. That it was this, so you have to remember, we were Christian, and
so you didn't believe in America.
No, when you're a Christian, I don't know how to, and it's going to sound so funny and ironic coming out of our mouths because it's not true, but you feel persecuted all the time. You know?
It's kind of like how like cis white men just are so persecuted all the time.
But that's literally what it is. Like, a lot of the way Christianity is kind of taught in America, we have this like sense of like, we're constantly persecuted, we're constantly under fire, nobody's for us. The way the world is presented to us in the church is like this idea
that's true, that everyone's out to steal your relationship with God, basically. Everybody's out to distance you from God. And
you always feel like, we're meant to feel like the underdogs nonstop.
Yeah.
So you have this moment that suddenly not only is everyone unified, but we're all
super like
spiritually unified as well. And it's just like American flags, our Christian president.
God bless the USA.
You wrote that down, and I completely forgot about that.
Oh yeah, I was like,
but I love that song.
We got a good song out of it too. And let me tell you, like, if anybody ever karaoke's that song, the whole audience so quickly will lose their shit, and everybody just gets so patriotic for 3.5 minutes. That song really does still strike a chord with people. Like, it really just, it hits.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So some of the notes I took were that, first off, interesting note, the when the first plane hit, all programs and commercials apparently were suspended.
Oh.
With the 4 major networks broadcasting uninterrupted news coverage. That's Fox, NBC, ABC, and
that would make
CBS.
sense why it was just on.
Right, and apparently that was the first for a vast majority since the advent of cable and satellite TV to just cold stop.
Yeah,
right there in the middle of everything. I mean, it shifted everything. Like, you want to talk about the cultural impact. It was insane to think of just how much just got shelved or canceled or reworked or rewritten or edited or they would put. They had to like go over every single thing and make sure what someone said wasn't going to trigger people, or that you couldn't show images of the Twin Towers. Like, they're like the copy of like the 1970s King Kong where he climbs the Twin Towers. The VHS cover was completely redone, repackaged, and resold because it's just like, we were so sensitive as a country, and rightfully so. It's just, it was such a full stop of like, quick, we've got to change everything right now. Whereas you think of some countries just don't have that luxury. They deal with something and then immediately
it is what it is.
It is what it is. Their kids have to deal with it. They're stuck in the middle of that shit, and no one's there to clean up for them and go, hey, here's a better America. Here's a better country.
Yeah.
Here's something better to look at. It's like, no.
It's true. Because, I mean, like, it's like with Lilo and Stitch where they, like, originally the last, like, chase in the spaceships was supposed to be a plane.
Yeah, he was supposed to hijack, or he did hijack a 747, and you can look up, like, the link. I'm not going to include it, but just search Lilo and Stitch original ending.
And it was a plane, and
weaving all throughout the buildings of Honolulu,
and they said, well, that's a bad idea. So that got changed to a spaceship, which, you know what, that's good, because I think that was a little insensitive anyway to have him steal a plane full of people.
He shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But, well, something I wrote down here, which I wanted to ask you. So our first lady at the time, Laura Bush, she asked the parents not to let their kids see the destructive images over and over again. Recommended that they turn off the television and do something constructive, reassuring, and calming with their kids. And my question for you is that healthy for us? Do you think, is it dangerous that, like, on one end of the world, children are allowed to be,
or forced to be, basically, because they have no other choice. Like, they're not able to hide things because they just don't have that luxury. So they're kind of thrown into.
But over here, we're afforded the luxury of, for those of us who weren't immediately dealing with it, who weren't actually there when it happened or didn't lose loved ones, we were afforded the luxury to be able to go, okay, moving on.
Yeah. Be like, well, let's not dwell on this because we don't have to.
Which is kind of a weird irony because we are dwelling on it. Like the news was like 24/7 dwelling on it.
Exactly. But I think I do agree with that. Just in the aspect of, it's like the difference between, like, the poor kid who grew up without a father and the mom was always working and they had to take care of their little brother, and, like, they had to, like, have a job really young, and, like, they had to grow up really quickly and didn't have a childhood, versus, like, the rich kid who was, like, raised by the nanny and, like, didn't ever have to worry about anything and, like, blah blah blah, and they're kind of oblivious to the world. And one kid is introduced to the world too quickly. Like, neither one is good. But you really want to be right in the middle of that, which I think is kind of what the First Lady was saying, because it says don't let the parents don't let your children see destructive images over and over again. So it's like, don't sit there with your kid
That's true.
in the house all day for hours on end, letting them watch everything happen, because that's really, a kid shouldn't see that all day.
Yeah.
But I mean, to let them be like, this is what's going on, like, this is what's happening right now, like, let them in on it, let them process it and understand it, and help help explain it to them, and then move past it and show them that the world isn't ending.
Right. I mean,
that's healthy.
There are some kids who are, their childhood is basically stolen from them. And while you do want to prepare your kid for the real world, you also don't want to prematurely steal from them.
Yeah.
If you don't have to.
Exactly.
Do I send my kid out right now and time it perfectly? Do I send him out too early, or do I risk sending him out too late? Do I risk?
Because you don't want to be like, there's all this bad stuff out there and it's going to get you. And then they grow up terrified, or you don't want to wait until a bunch of bad shit happens to them and be like, that happens.
Right.
So
which it's easy for that latter to happen when you're homeschooled, because a lot of times you're in a bubble, and my parents actually were really good about prepping me for a lot of things, because I'll look at other homeschool kids and just go, oh my God, did no one ever talk to you about how the real world is?
Apparently not. But
you go out in the real world and just like, wait a minute, everybody doesn't believe the same thing I believe, or
Yeah, nah, girl, they don't.
So it must be difficult raising I can't even imagine what parents had to go through raising their children during that time, and how much of it, the ones who are at least self-aware enough to ask those questions, like, how much do I want to involve my kid in what's happening?
Yeah. And I think it was just something that it was so public that there's obviously no hiding it, but just how am I going to keep them going and keep them calm,
You were in church at that time, right?
What do you mean?
Like, you were going to church.
I go to church. I've been to church my whole life.
Right. So what was it like? What was it like when that happened?
I don't remember. Probably a lot of praying. What was it like at church for you?
No, I mean, I basically said it was like this weird feeling of like, now the world's on our side.
Oh, okay.
You know? And not to a degree, not in a sick, weird, perverse way, but there was this weird sense of like a lot of people felt in a way relieved that for once we all had a common enemy.
Yeah.
And now looking back, and it's like that's strange.
Yeah.
And no one, I don't think people were consciously thinking like, oh, I'm so glad that they attacked and killed people.
Obviously not.
But there was a sense of like, oh, finally.
We're all agreeing on something.
We're not the underdogs, which when you think about it, it's like unless you live in a third world country where they actively go after your religion and your beliefs.
Christians are not by any means underdogs.
We're not the underdogs here.
I mean, the country was based on Christianity. Like, come on.
So it's hard. But at the time, of course, I believed. I was like, oh my God, nobody likes Christians. And now suddenly it's like, well, wow, they finally like our president. They like us. They like, so odd.
I think maybe it's just a thing where they're like preparing you for like the end times.
Oh my God, the end times. What were you taught about the end times?
That they're here.
Did you ever
always?
were you taught the whole the rapture and the mark of the beast and all that craziness?
Yeah, no, I know the mark of the beast.
Sorry guys, now there's some weird obscure Christian talk there.
Yeah, I know the mark of the beast. I know just it's the rapture is controversial because people don't know if it would happen before or after.
Obviously, people want that to happen before all that shit happens.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like, I want to be a Christian and just deuce out.
Sounds good to me. But
yeah, all of that suddenly was like, well, there it is. Happening.
That's it. We're done. Checking out.
God, and it's so how I don't want to say vain because that's an insult, but how telling. That's the word I'll use. How telling. That the one attack that happened to us, we were suddenly like, well, that's it.
The world must be ending now because we got attacked. It's like, oh, really? Now it's a problem? Like,
interesting things that happened. The U.S. Patriot Act, which was passed on October 26, 2001, strengthened national security, giving permission to law enforcement to search and detain without consent. Wiretaps could be bypassed in favor of accessing stored voicemail or intercepting communications on protected computers. FBI was given access to documents that, quote, revealed the patterns of U.S. citizens.
Right. So that's when they got access to our phones.
Right.
And thus the algorithm was born.
And what's interesting, I searched. I couldn't find a lot of articles that talked about the correlation between 9/11, September 11th, our response to September 11th, and how our response basically trickled down to our consumeristic use of the internet. Because all those things go into play. You saw the movie Small Soldiers where they were like, we have military technology, but now that we don't have anything to do with it, we'll just put it into toys.
Yeah.
That was kind of like a parody of that, but it's
kind of true.
It's true. Like everything, all of the advances, most of the advances that we have technologically is from war.
Yeah.
Are from advances that we made trying to...
I mean, water guns. They're just guns. Like, come on. And now they're a kid's toy.
And it's just so strange. And that's what I meant by that, like, rift in time where essentially or that term I was talking about, how, like, we just had this, like, this jump in evolution where we were progressing at a steady rate in terms of, like, the internet and our communications, and then suddenly it was like, we need to communicate 24/7. We need to know where our kids are. We need to know where our country's at. We need to know what everyone is doing and what they're talking about at all times. And that absolutely affected things as innocuous as MySpace and Facebook and Friendster was around before.
The hell is that?
It's before our time.
Before my time.
Right, because I'm so much older than you.
You are.
And so that's just so weird to think about. Like, we would not be where we're at socially if it wasn't for 9/11.
That's crazy.
Because we didn't have something that essentially is set afire to
be in communication
and learn and like really, really like. I mean, it was it was our version of the space race. Like suddenly we had a bunch of people working in different areas of the world to just like boost communication and really figure out how to keep in touch with things at all times and make sure something like this never ever happens again.
Yeah. I also didn't realize until this happened that apparently people used to hijack planes. Like that was like a thing. Like did you know that?
I kind of knew that.
Like
yes.
plane hijacking was like kind of a thing. Like obviously it didn't happen every week, but it was like, yeah, you know, sometimes people hijack the plane and then you have to like offer people money to land the plane safely, and then they like get away in a car or something and go off to Ibiza, and you're just like, and I was like,
Ibiza?
I don't know, but I told, because I remember asking my mom this, like, I forgot what the question was exactly, but something to the effect of like, how was this okay? Like where, or like, why, when they found out that the planes were hijacked, did they not do anything immediately? And she was like, well, it kind of happens sometimes, but usually people just want like money. Like it's not something that like nobody's ever.
And never was there like an attack so specific to the heart of America.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it was like, because the Twin Towers basically stood as this like capitalistic like, and I don't even say that like cynically. I'm just saying it stood as this monument to like, look what we can accomplish.
I mean, they were the World Trade Centers. Like it was our communication with the world.
And basically literally ripping down an image of what America stood for. And like you think about all the films that like had it, like had those.
Oh yeah, because that was the iconic like New York shot, was the towers. What's there now? Like the Freedom Tower, right?
Yeah.
Did they finally build that?
Have you been there?
No.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. You were there recently.
I went, well, in the last 4 years. That was a.
I went. I never. I don't know. I never do touristy things when I'm in New York because I visit family. So I really want to do a trip where I do touristy.
It was one of the better touristy things to do because, like, as touristy as it is, there's just this reverence that, like, hopefully, if you're empathetic or sympathetic enough, like, this reverence just washes over you. That I felt like compelled to just sit there in silence for. I mean, I think I walked through there in about an hour, but it was very unnerving and very kind of humbling to just look at like all of these lives and everything that was affected and changed after that one day, 2 hours, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, you know, everything changed. So I had people, I posted a question on my Instagram asking people to tell us how 9/11 impacted their life. I had one person, Mike O'Hora. He responded that his dad was supposed to be in one of the towers that day. Wow. Mike's dad was supposed to be in the towers that day. And of course his friends lost parents. So I mean, that was a recurring thing that I saw a lot of.
Was that people lost people or somebody was supposed to?
Kristen, who I won't mention her last name, but Kristen said that half of her classmates had parents that worked in the city, and her teen friends lost parents. They were devastated. So I of course reached out to her and just told her, sent her my condolences, thoughts and prayers, whatever the hell you can do. But I did tell her, I was like, hopefully, at the time you were some form of light to your friends, because I was like, that's all we can be. Like, more than thoughts and prayers, like the best you can do is actually physically be there for someone. She responded back that, I will never forget my sophomore history teacher because we watched it live on the news in her classroom. And it really, and these are her words, it really felt depressingly fitting that I was in history class. The entire school was sent home about an hour later so we could get in touch with parents. Spent the rest of the year in and out of appointments with grief counselors. It was a rough year.
Wow. Yeah.
So these are just like, let's see, who else?
What about the request?
Pastor Eric Johnson, he actually responded to me. He said, post 9/11, TSA constantly searches my hair.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. We've had Pastor Eric on before.
Yeah.
He was on our Pixar episode. That hair is beautiful and is holding no weapons.
Yeah, like, I mean,
just weapons of mass beauty.
I was like, weapons of mass seduction.
Ah, damn it. So much better than mine. I couldn't think of one on the spot.
I know.
This is why I'm not a comedian. I'd be like, hey guys, why'd the chicken cross the road? The chicken he was on one side of the road.
And
then he went to he had to, the road was there. He had the road. He had to cross. The chicken had to cross the road.
Don't hurt yourself there. Hop aboard, explorer.
Oh, this is an interesting one, and kind of like a funny one. I could no longer meet or see people off at the gate of an airport after 9/11.
Yeah.
And if you're in a romantic comedy, you can no longer run after your loved one.
Yeah, and meet them and grab them right before they walk onto the plane. No. Not a thing anymore.
No slow claps in front of the airport gate for you.
Which is like, I don't remember ever being able to do that, which is crazy.
One of the last things I kind of wanted to touch upon, the term 9/11, it's just so strange to think how two numbers could become so ominous. Like 9/11 used to meant I'm calling for safety, I'm calling for help. Mm-hmm. And now it's kind of like this weird duality of just like 9/11, and everybody knows what you're talking about. Yeah. Everyone can remember essentially where they were. I brought it up to a coworker today.
Yeah.
Just today I was like, isn't it crazy to think that tomorrow's the 18th anniversary? And she buttoned up and was like, I was there. And then that was all she wanted to say. That I don't even like thinking about it.
That's crazy.
And I was like, okay.
And yeah, like I don't obviously remember a lot of things, especially past like before a certain age. Like I don't remember specifics on where I was or what I was doing. And I definitely remember that. So that tells you right there that was obvious. You know, if you didn't believe that it was a big event before this,
Benji says it is.
That's annoying.
Anything that you kind of want to say before?
So 2 buildings fell, almost 3,000 people died. And it was a worldwide tragedy. Tell me why in Man of Steel they can knock down half the entire fucking city and nobody cares.
I'm telling you that's the...
Just to bring it back to movies real quick.
No, I
bane
think
of my existence. Not just that. That was the worst offender, but just any movie.
And no, it's a good point because obviously... I mean, I was looking through the list of films that were affected by 9/11 kind of like immediately within a 5-year span.
Oh my God. Can you imagine if they let that out? Like,
but that's the thing. It's so insane to think about. Like, you can do all of this, like redressing, re-editing, getting rid of the buildings. People, apparently they cut out the Twin Towers section from Home Alone 2. Really? For a good chunk when they would show it on TV. You can do all of that you want, but people weren't learning the actual lesson, which isn't to protect and forget. It was like remember and reverence and respect.
Exactly, respect.
And you have filmmakers like, and I'm sorry, I do actually appreciate some of your work, but you have filmmakers who like Michael Bay or Zack Snyder where they like just throw around death and violence so casually, which I'm not against. I do enjoy films that tend to be violent. But like you can tell that there's a disconnect that the way they write and they have I'm not saying like it needs to be overly patriotic. It's just in a real world, if a character like Man of Steel was in the middle of the ashes of an entire city and he just started making and he makes out with his girlfriend in that moment, it's just like that's
so disrespectful.
That just all that tells me is like he doesn't actually consider people.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, I'd like to think that, I mean, because there's a difference too. It's not like kissing someone and like, oh my God,
I'm never going to see you again.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad I survived. There's a difference between that. Like, even as dumb as it is, do you remember the end of Twister when they survive like the tornado and they're like, let's make out?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's kind of cheesy, but also like they just survived
it's something crazy.
A traumatic event. They kind of, but in that moment, it's like this, Lois, the girl I love.
Finally.
There's like a finally, except that finally is surrounded by the ashes of dead people. And you're just like.
Of like an entire freaking city.
And you can tell that the filmmakers, they're like, what? Superman saved the day. It's like.
No, he didn't.
No.
Like.
Not even like forgetting the fact that he pummeled through the buildings. Let's just forget that. Like just pure decency. We don't need him making out.
Yeah.
Not kissing someone he's loved forever and like just like there's the adrenaline. It's just a makeout sesh,
like,
you know.
Ooh, I saved the world and I'm horny. Let's
basically. And then of course, what did they cut to? Hi, I'm Clark Kent. I'm working at the Daily Planet, and no one there is just like burdened by the eternal weight of the fact that they've lost half of their city.
The freaking city. Like
it's like the one thing I did appreciate about the sequel, Batman v Superman, was that like at least Batman was acting like an actual human being would during that time, which is like, A, that was tragic. B, we should stop it. C, we should overreact and make sure that anybody who's a foreigner gets the hell out, which is like essentially
what?
Well, that's what he was like.
He turned into Trump?
Well, I mean,
Batman did?
He pretty much was just like
Aliens?
Yeah, he was like
actual aliens from another world.
Right.
You said foreigners.
Well,
get out.
Sorry.
I was like,
I meant like foreign. But it essentially wasn't, and it might be an overreaction or not, but the point is like he was volatile.
It's the human reaction to overreact and be like, no, everyone has to go now.
Right. I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
Whereas,
what I'm just saying is like it's at least more human reaction than, hey guys, I'm Clark Kent and everything's okay. It's like
no, what? It's not. But it plays into like the Islamophobia that happened after 9/11.
Yeah, and that's something I want to do a future episode on when we have the proper guest. But just, I mean, it's a whole other episode worth of how we treated people who essentially believed. Because like I said, once we were no longer the underdogs, someone had to be the enemy. Not only physically in terms of like Al-Qaeda, Muslim, you're the enemy, quote unquote. But then someone had to be the spiritual enemy. Someone had to be kind of like, well, if America's on top, what's in opposition? You know, who presents the threat to that? And it's just
before it was the Russians, right? They were always the bad guys in all the movies, and then it
was Nazis before that, Russians after that. After the Cold War, was the Russians, and then
who's next? Millennials.
Okay, we're obviously
all right. We're deteriorating.
Before I signed off, I did want to just say, obviously, anybody who was personally affected by this, there's really nothing we can say or do. Just know that however you were there for your family or for your loved ones or just for people maybe you never met. I know even my dad, he was part of a group that traveled out to New York about a month after it happened. And they went out there and they loved on people.
That's awesome.
People can say what they want to or not because it was a Christian group going out there. But I believe at the time there was just this, as strange as it is to say, there was this unifying feeling. It wasn't about people wanting to, for the ones who weren't completely overtaken with fear and anger, there was less a sense of like, I need to make people Christian and more a sense of like, we actually need to be there for people.
Yeah, exactly. It's beyond trying to affect somebody's religion and more just about just being like, are you okay? Like, what can I do for you?
I saw a lot of people step up to the plate during that time. And I didn't really know it, but I look back on it now and there was this kind of beautiful sense of like, we're just going to be there. And for a brief moment, everyone was like, truly living up to what they said they believed in.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody was being that ideal of like American,
but it doesn't take
together.
It doesn't take that tragedy. And you know, just thank you for those of you who helped, who served in the war, whether you believed in it or not. Thank you for fighting for the idea of our American freedoms. Thank you for actually fighting for our American freedom. Thank you for the firefighters who were there, the police officers, the families who took others in, the ones who defended people who were being persecuted, anybody who stood up for anything or any cause during that time. And I'm not saying that in a blanket, let's just like not have a statement. I mean, like anybody who
went out of their way
to help. Yeah.
In any way, whatever way it was.
I don't know if you guys know, but this was a little
last minute.
This was a little bit last minute, and it kind of snuck up on us, but it was something that I just felt like we had to do. So I promised you that we would have kind of a different episode. So let's
there it is.
Let's sign it off. We're not. If you follow us, thank you, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So I'm Josiah Rizzo.
I'm Benji Jones.
And Wednesdays
we usually wear pink.
Thank you for listening, and you have an awesome, blessed week.